As is typical in this seminar, we like to kind of give a little, the pathway, career trajectory of different speakers, so you can see how you might or might not fit into different pathways. And so I'll start with myself. I won't go in too much depth. I could do this in an hour long, but I'll try and keep it to 5 minutes or so. And 1997, that's when I graduated from high school. I may have graduated when I was 10, so we're not going to make any judgments about how old I am right now. I went to Tufts University. I went and studied mechanical engineering. And why I did that was because people said, oh, you're good at math and science. My dad was in construction. So I was like, yeah, but I had no idea really what engineering was. I just thought that, hey, they make good money. It's a good career, people say, so why not give it a try? And so I graduated in 2001 as a real engineer. I worked as an engineer for 3 years. And I still didn't really understand what engineering was. It was just doing things for these different companies. And the company I was working for went out of business. I was unemployed for a little bit of time. And in that time, I kept going on job interviews and asking myself, what is it that I want to do? Every job interview, I would say, I could do that for a year or two, but it wasn't really my passion. And what I saw was my passion was interacting with people, and particularly in an education setting. So I did some tutoring, did some other types of leadership programs, and decided that I wanted to go back and get a PhD. So I actually went back to Tufts, talked to Chris Rogers, who's coming in 2 weeks. He was my advisor there, and he had just started up the Center for Engineering Education and Outreach about 10 years before that, and they had just started a PhD program in engineering education. And so I had the idea if I could be a high school teacher, this would be cool. I could still bring my engineering background to this. And so I did my PhD there, and that's in 2009. I graduated. I became a K-12 engineering education expert with a question mark. All of these are because I don't think I'll ever be an expert in anything until maybe I die. And so from there, I was a postdoc at Tufts for a very short amount of time. I worked as research faculty at Tufts. And then I actually went to Arizona State before I came here for a whole 6 months as a research faculty member. And then I came on to Purdue fall of 2013. So that's my trajectory. Started as an engineer, saw that something was missing in really fulfilling what I wanted to do, and found engineering education as my pathway. So you might see yourself there. If you don't, that's fine. You can take any pathway. We all have very atypical pathways. As Michael mentioned, I'm the director of FACE Lab. It stands for All, a Chance to Engineer. These are the graduate students that currently work for me. I employ a number of undergrads. It was too hard for me to fit their pictures, so I left them off for this slide, but they're not left out of my hearts. So again, this is the highlight, or the title of my talk. And really the big picture here is diversity within engineering. And whenever I talk to a group of people about diversity, I'm the chair of the diversity committee. I'm on the national committee for ASEE as well. I always say I have to address the elephant in the room. And it's not because I went to Tufts University, home of the Jumbos. Yes, that's real. We are Jumbo the elephant is our mascot. It's because I'm a white guy, basically. And so I like to, in talking about diversity. And so I like to just kind of preface it by saying, I recognize and acknowledge that I have a certain set of privileges that allowed me to, when I went through engineering, that made it a pretty easy ride for me in some sense. So clearly, you may be able to tell, I'm white, I'm male, you wouldn't necessarily know, but I'm straight. I'm able-bodied, I can do things with my body very easily. I'm educated, I'm not saying I'm smart, I'm just saying I've been to school for a long time. I'm upper middle class. I'm tall. Some research shows that tall people are more successful in the business world. I'll take advantage of that when I can. I can also reach stuff at the grocery store very nicely. However, I am left-handed. How many left-handed people do we have out here? All right. Go lefties. And not to say that that causes me a lot of strife in my life. But you... Yeah. Can we remove that guy from the audience, please? So I like to, when I walked into a classroom, Tufts, our physics classroom looked just like this. I'm sure there's a physics building on campus that they have a room like that. And you walk in, and you could say, if I hadn't learned to deal with it, I might not feel so welcome or included in a room like this. Now, as a white male walking into an engineering classroom, I feel very, it's like everyone looks like me. I can imagine being I can't really imagine it, but being say a black female walking into an engineering classroom, you're likely to be the only one, especially here at Purdue. And so to me, it's important to understand what is the kind of current state of engineering, whether here at Purdue or anywhere, and then how do we start to change that? So that's where the broadening participation bent comes from. And I'm motivated partly by my experience in introducing engineering to young children in Boston and all over the world, and really that all students really have that desire and passion, and then there's something that happens along the way, and I want to understand that better and start to shift so that all people feel welcome and included in engineering. And so for me, it's what you all said, and think about that there's certainly the diversity of the people, so we want to make sure all those different people and their perspectives are at the table. To get at these diversity of ideas and solutions, if I keep designing something over and over again, it'll get a little monotonous, but if you have different people contributing, you can get different ideas. And then I also like to think about, so I listen to, in the first year engineering courses, all the different schools of engineering here at Purdue, all 13 of them, come in and share about their major, and I learn how diverse and how broad engineering is, and that there's anything you can imagine an engineer can interact with. So I like to think about also the diversity within engineering and STEM disciplines. And so for me, it's a lot about perspective taking too, right? And I think that came up. So who would like to guess what is in that image there? Any idea? What do you see there? Stack of books, that's common. What else? An electrical circuit, anything? Okay, it's very specific. Anything else? Stack contain, all right. So if we look beyond, it's a container ship with the container stack. And so I show this image to say, like, if you're going to have a very narrow view, everyone has their own view. Some people's are, every person is different. But if you're always looking at a problem this way, you're missing opportunities. And hopefully that's where the diversity of someone else with a different experience, a different background, can help you see the big ship if that's what you're looking for. And so if we think about how young children understand, or even just society in general thinks, like, who are engineers and what do they do? We can go to Google, search that. These are our images. We can keep scrolling. We'll see more. We can scroll again. And we see the train guy at least. Keep going. We now see some gears. My mechanical engineering. I'm like, yay, right? But you do see, like, what I do like that you see a lot of diversity in the hard hat colors, right? There's orange, yellow, white, blue. I mean, they're pretty diverse there. I'm joking. There's not a lot of diversity in these pictures, and not in just the people, but also in what they're doing. They're all on construction sites for the most part with plans on them. And if for some reason you use Bing to do your Google search, they'll show Mickey Mouse as an engineer, which is very much similar. And so this is kind of, it's not Google's fault or Bing's fault. It's kind of how we as a society have kind of thought of what an engineer is and what they do, and selected those to be the things that most represent that. And so obviously you may have seen that there wasn't much diversity of people, and that's, to me, a problem that we need to address, and that engineers can be much more than this, and to show students and show all people that this is not typical. And so when I go into classrooms or present this to younger students, I have to kind of start to break some of the myths about who engineers are and what they do. They fix cars or wear hard hats. Some do, yes, but many do not. I was a mechanical engineer and had nothing to do with cars and never wanted to do anything with cars and fixing cars. They may sit at computers all day. I kind of do all the day, but that's a different story. I have no people skills. Unfortunately, sometimes that's more true than I'd like it to be. But hopefully we can get more and different people in. And then the idea that it's for boys Even teachers, as they mentor students, are targeting the boy who's building, like, oh, he's going to be an engineer, and maybe missing that opportunity for girls. And so part of the work is to bust these myths, and I like to show the students that you'll find engineers work everywhere, so I try and relate it to them. It'll be in the movies, whether it's in the kind of sound or visual effects, lighting, etc. I'll just move through this quickly. But you can imagine that engineering is all around everything, whether it's music, with all the different sorts of things, whether it's transporting the equipment from site to site. Within fashion, so our clothes are being wicking sweat faster and easier, new different materials being engineered. Sports, and so like the equipment has to be safe, or we're tracking our fitness and abilities. I always liked the baseball one. My freshman year at Tufts, I took a engineering in baseball course and learned about how to throw a curveball and a screwball, and we toured Fenway Park, so that was cool. Mary Pilaud, if she was here, she could talk about multidisciplinary engineering. It's really bringing together all different ideas and interests, and you can create and design solutions for whatever you want. It's all around in everything we do. I like to tell the students when they walk into a McDonald's, an engineer has thought about how are they going to get you through there, spend as much money as possible, and be as efficient as possible. And of course, if you become an engineer, it doesn't mean you have to work as an engineer the rest of your life. You could become a lawyer, a doctor, CEO of McDonald's, a financial analyst, a business owner, entrepreneur, teacher, etc. And so it's a great foundation for anything you want to do. And if you come to Purdue, you'll probably become an astronaut. I'm still waiting for them to recruit me. My takeaway, from what I know about engineering is that engineering is diverse, and it does require diverse solutions. However, it doesn't seem to match what we get into the engineering classroom. So what's the problem? And this is where the NSF Career Award that I was awarded, my talk is called Broadening Context to Broaden Participation. So that's the title of my project. And where it came from, what was the motivating factors? I've done a lot of engineering activities with young students. I've done a lot of the robotics stuff with my advisor, Chris Rogers. I've seen a lot of the gumdrop bridges, which my lab group will tell you that I will despise. I really make fun of that one a lot for some reason. However, when you do these activities with kids and you say, this is engineering, and they do it, they all have awesome experiences. Like most research shows or the evaluations show that the students' interest and perceptions of engineering go up. They increase, they're more excited about it. And I don't doubt that. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's very engaging and interesting. We've been doing this work for about 15 years, more systematically in classrooms, and we still haven't seen the needle really shift too much in terms of representation and who becomes an engineer or who goes to engineering school. And so it had me thinking of the psychology of interests, and there's kind of one main distinction, if you kind of look at the social psychology of interest, between your personal interest and a situational interest. So a personal interest is what's really motivating you, guiding your, what drives you, what makes you want to be what you want to be in life. Whereas a situational interest is more of the interestingness of a situation. So we're all having a great time listening to me talk, me too. You're all very welcome. It doesn't mean that you necessarily want to go up and talk or sit in this room every day for the rest of your life. It might be entertaining, but no. And so it's really the situation. And so I think that maybe what's going on is that these activities are situationally interesting, right? It's a lot better than the math worksheet or reading the book silently in the classroom when I come in with a bunch of gumdrops and toothpicks, we're having a good time. And so the students correlate that to engineering, and then yes, engineering is fun. However, they don't necessarily persist in math and science and why that would be important. And so the research questions I look to answer in this, I'm about a year and a half into this project, is does broadening the context of the type of activity we engage students in appeal to more students' personal interests? Does it empower underrepresented groups to make personally meaningful connections? And does it lead to more authentic engagement in the engineering design practices we want them to engage in? And then does it improve their attitudes and perceptions of engineering? And so As I said, we're about a year and a half in, so we've kind of broken this into different phases as we kind of think about what would be this framework that we call an interest-based engineering challenge framework to really make sure that students' interests are at the center of these engineering activities. And so that phase one is kind of testing things out in the lab and also interviewing students to get an understanding of what kind of interests they bring to the table before we even start. So I'm going to share with you some of the results from the phase one interview study. And so these are the questions we asked the students, really getting at what kind of interests do they have. So what are their personal interests? We asked various questions related to that. What is your favorite subject for academic, career interests? Are you interested in engineering if they didn't necessarily choose engineering as a career interest? And then we asked them to define what engineering is to them. Because if we're saying, are you interested in engineering, and they think it's one thing, and we think it might be something else, that's going to be telling. Do you have a question? Yep, I'll tell you in 1 second. Nice segue. I didn't plant her. So we had 28 students, and these were so 28 students, 10 African American, 4 Hispanic, and 14 white students. And then there's the grade breakdown. And then, so 19 of them had participated in an engineering activity, and then 9 of them had not ever done kind of any engineering activity. And since then, we have closer to 100 total interviews now that will, but we haven't analyzed everything from that yet. And so we had all the responses, and then we used the Holland's career theory to code those. And so the RIASIC is what I call it, maps to these things. So realistic is like that hands-on building. So if you have this theory says each person, their interests may fall into these 6 categories. Now, it's not a finite thing that you can't be interested in something outside of this, but they try to put most things into this area. And Holland then kind of mapped these 2 careers. So I'll show you that in a second as well. But the idea is the realistic are those hands-on building type things. Investigative is mostly connected to like science and math, analytical kind of reasoning type things. Artistic is what you might expect, the kind of sometimes hands-on, but music and art and other things like that. Social is you want to help make a change in the world with people, interact with people. Enterprising is kind of that business-minded. You want to kind of persuade people, start a business, etc. Conventional is more the kind of organizational, following routines and stuff like that. And so the idea is we could map these onto the students' responses. If you look at, so this is from the Labor Department, so they've taken a number of careers and mapped them to the RIASIC framework. And then you can kind of get a profile of what a typical, and again, this is kind of that stereotypical view of what a mechanical engineer would look like in this case. So you can, whoop, hello, backwards. All right, so you can see, an engineer or a mechanical engineer is very high in that investigative, so that's the kind of STEM areas, would make sense. High in the realistic, again, that would make sense. And then reasonably high in this conventional, that's kind of that systematic process. And then quite low in artistic, social, and enterprising, which I think is sad. It would be nice to have artistic and social engineers. And in comparison, I mostly want to direct you to this one, a pediatrician. Now, of course, they have to have that investigative, scientific, mathematical reasoning and thinking, but they're much higher in the social. So this one, they don't actually break it down in numbers. They just pick, these are the highest 2. Above, I think they're above that 50 threshold. So you can imagine, growing up as someone who's interested in math and science, but you're more of a people person rather than a building person. Well, being a doctor makes more sense than being an engineer. However, I think being an engineer could actually be just as fitting for you as well if you found a particular career that worked with humans or people and more so than some other positions. Oops, there we go, backwards. So these are the results. So if we took all the students, this is how their interests kind of fell out. It's not surprising that the enterprising and conventional didn't come up. We did have one conventional code, and that was someone who liked to study words, and they like to read the dictionary and understand the etymology of words. I'm like, okay, that sounds pretty conventional. And the enterprising, these are younger kids, so they're not talking about starting businesses or anything like that. But what we do see is that they're pretty, they're all over the place with the other ones, which we would expect that you'd have people with different interests. And if we look at the people who had participated in an engineering program versus not, we again see there's not much difference. These students are all doing the typical things that kids do. However, I think where we saw the biggest difference was their understanding of engineering. So if they had never done an engineering activity, so that's the, whoops, all right, that's the NP. They saw engineering as very realistic, very, oh, oops, I'm on the wrong one. There we go. And now this is, okay. So the non-participating, it's very realistic and it's very investigative and nothing else except a little enterprising over here. Whereas the people who had participated in an engineering program, they started to see that it's realistic and investigative, but they also really saw that social piece. And I think part of that, the different programs that they were in really emphasized that engineers help people, and that's a message that's starting to become more prominent with working with younger kids and introducing them to engineering, is that engineers help people make the world a better place, that sort of thing. So that's promising that we started to see that there. And so people who were here 2 weeks ago may remember our presenter, Professor Rong Su, who talked about fit and using the RISIC model to kind of fit people to a career. And so if we think about back to those, mechanical engineer versus pediatrician, there would be a profile, a score for each of the, RISIC things. And so this might be a typical engineering thing where they're high in their investigative, realistic, and then low on some of these other ones. And this might be a student's profile where they're kind of just all over the place, have multiple interests. And so if, at the end of end of their career as a student, they see engineering as that, and then they see themselves as this profile, there's not a great fit, and they may not choose engineering. And so my goal, and I'm actually going to be partnering with Dr. Su on this as well, is to see, can we actually have them engage in an engineering activity where they start to change their perception of what engineering is? And so the green one is this new kind of revised perception of what engineering is. And so do we expose them to the artistic side of engineering, the social side of engineering, such that maybe they're starting to create this profile of what they think an engineering is that better fits or matches their own personal profile of interest. And so that's really the impetus behind my work, is how do we have them start to understand engineering in a new, broader way, and then attract a new, broader kind of audience of students. So again, the students have these diverse interests, but they may not see the diversity and how that matches in engineering. And so that's the goal of the work, is to present them those opportunities to make those new connections. I'll show you some of the activities I've done and how they connected a lot of these ideas. But how I kind of started the thinking about this is, how do we broaden the context of what engineering is by placing it in a more social context? Because engineering does exist in society. Many people maybe forget that. But we engineer with people. So in most classes at Purdue, in engineering classes, you're going to team up with people, do projects together. When you work as an engineer, you're going to be on a team. You're rarely going to work as an individual. You're going to work for people, so you're going to engineer solutions for different groups of people, different types of people. And then you'll also engineer as a person, and that's back to your own individual choice, your own individual beliefs and values, and you bring that to the table whether you are aware of it or not. And so if we can focus on that people part of it, I think we start to open up a broader, situation where, maybe the springboard is in this community pool, and what does that bring to the table that was different than if it was in the, Purdue co-rec where they're practicing for the diving championship. So there's different social context everything is designed in, and allowing students to understand that, maybe they can find some other point of interest to engage in. And so some of the types of activities I've done is engage. So there's a couple different things. So if we go back to this real briefly, I really like to make sure that they always work with people, and that's pretty easy. You know, it's easier to manage, you know, a group of 40 students and their teams of 4 than you have 10 projects rather than 40 different projects. So that's kind of out of the way. But I make sure that they are designing for someone. And so in the case of this one and this one, I had older, so these are college students who design, those aren't college students, very advanced. These are 3 to 5 year olds that my college students designed for, and these are like 10-year-olds that I had high schoolers designing for. And so they met with these clients and learned more about these clients and then designed solutions. This one was they designed something that'll teach young kids more about sustainability and recycling and stuff like that. So they made a smartboard app that did something really cool stuff. This one was the high schoolers. I asked them to create a game that appealed to their interests, but also appealed to a 9-year-old's interest. So they talked to these 9-year-olds and said, what are things that you're interested in? And so this group developed it's really cool. I think we should make these. It's a double pinball machine. So instead of playing by yourself, you're playing opposite someone. You have the same paddles and it shoots through. It doesn't make all the cool noises that maybe the next version will. And so then they decorated it with Mario Brothers themes and stuff like that. But they were able to extract their interest and their client's interest and develop this tool. And again, it's back to that choice, right? Like, so the theme was design something, some kind of game or activity that you and these other people will be interested in. So they get to choose what those things are. They have to kind of appeal to someone else as well. And then, you know, within constructing this activity, so back to the 3D printing and CADing, so someone might have been really interested in, we have a laser cutter that they use or a 3D printer to make the paddles. So different students might have found a passion in developing the paddle, or, you know, someone might have really thought the artistic layout was important. They designed a toad. These little bumpers were little toad whatever things from Mario Brothers. So they were able to find their interests, apply it, and then, you know, the engagement of those authentic design activities or engineering activities or practices is really in the planning and the problem solving and scoping and constructing of this device. Then this summer camp, this past summer, this group, these were 10 to 14-year-olds, and they were participating in a program where they did like swimming and basketball and all these different activities, and they spent an hour with us each day for 10 days. And this group, they wanted to make something to protect their head from the basketball because they weren't really interested in basketball, so they would get hit in the head a lot because they weren't paying attention. And so they developed this. It is. I don't think it's going to work. I had a video of it. It does work, but I don't think this video will work because it's on my laptop. But it absolutely does work. The ball bounces off and doesn't touch her head. And it was way cool. I thought it was awesome. These were like, I think, 10-year-olds who developed that. Here, these students were here for a summer camp where they were organized into interest groups. We said, who's interested in food? And you go over there. Who's interested in sports and music? And they kind of separated in different groups. So they designed an assistive device for someone who'd lost part of their hand. They actually related it to a vet, so a military vet who lost their hand. And they said that this would be an attachment that they could use, you know, switch out, and it would have a fork, a knife, and a spoon on it. They, you know, and they 3D printed it, and it really looked quite nice. And so again, really looking for opportunities for them to connect their interests to the design and making of an artifact. This is so my work is usually creating a theme and then allowing them to do multiple different projects so they have that choice. And here, an assistive device, they made an automatic toilet paper unroller, so it conveys down and it rips it off automatically. And then I'm not sure how realistic that is. Don't be looking for them in the Purdue bathrooms. I'm pretty sure they're not there. And so, and beyond that, how do you make sure that you're creating an inclusive environment? So this is a little worksheet myself and some colleagues developed for the American Society of Engineering Education. Just some kind of good rules of thumb, not necessarily if you do something wrong here that you're messing everything up, but some guidelines of, you know, make sure that these are collaborative activities, not always competitive. Sometimes competition alienates those who maybe didn't win and they don't see success, whereas in collaboration, hopefully everyone can win or have that success. the context matters. So yeah, if I go, I grew up in the Northeast. If I'm talking about skiing, it may not make so much sense if I'm in Arizona, unless you're in Flagstaff or something like that. Is it culturally relevant? So know your students, know what makes sense to them, what's relevant, what's interesting to them. There's some research that shows that, so the design, plan, then build, female students often in a pre-college classroom will want to actually plan out before they start making something, building their robot or whatever. And the boys will care less about planning and just jump in and grab materials, and then the materials will be gone by the time the girls who have thoughtfully planned out their design go and try and get their materials. So think about that when you're doing it. Think about how you improve their teaming. Universal design for learning is just making sure you have multiple representations to learn and teach. And then make sure you have positive role models. So when I go to a classroom, I'm the white guy, and I might go to a diverse classroom and they're like, oh, the white guy's an engineer. I'm not a white guy, so I probably won't be an engineer. So making sure that I either bring people with me that look like the students, or show them examples of people who have succeeded in engineering that may look more like them. So that's, I thought I was going to be able to leave a few more minutes for questions, but I'm happy to take any questions or thoughts at this time. We did get a chance to interact, so that was good. But any questions before we close?